Let's deal with the first thing first, which is that banks can cancel you for wrongthink. That's just completely Orwellian, isn't it? And for most people, Alex, who haven't got a huge nest egg to sit back on, if we remove cash from their lives as well, they will be bankrupt and they'll have lost their house before the bank rectifies it and they get an apology.
Yeah, well, there are two things going on here. There are banks which say that if you behave violently or badly towards their staff or verbally abuse someone, or if you're, potentially involved with criminal activity, or, and this is a word that they've used, discriminate against somebody, then they have the right to close your account. And it is potentially under that last catch-all phrase of discrimination that normal people who just happen to take a view are being punished. But there's something else going on as well, which is a load of legislation that was first brought into the UK in around 2007, and it was all to do with foreign agents largely using clearing houses of London and banks in the UK to launder money in slush funds. And then it's sort of been added to in 2017 regarding what you call politically exposed people. Now, this is supposed to account for people who hold political positions in foreign countries where there is a high level of risk of corruption. And as I alluded to earlier, things like money laundering and getting dodgy, dirty money and trying to hide it. This shouldn't, under any circumstances, be affecting somebody who is an elected official or politically connected in this country. And it's this that I think the banks are using to begin to essentially launch an establishment attack against people whose politics they fundamentally disagree with. But I think legally there should be no right in doing this. What then happens is this precipitates a big problem where someone's been flagged as a politically exposed person that the banks will then turn around and say, we've got to do so much background research into you, so many credit checks and crime reference checks and, swoops into your entire family and all your relatives, that actually it's going to cost us too much money to give you a bank account. So there's two things the government needs to look at here. One is this idea that anybody can have their bank account closed if they've posted something online or made a comment about whatever it is they may believe in that goes against the sort of current social mores. And the other is whether people are being sort of persecuted and having their rights to access to finances taken away because they're involved in politics.
There is also then another angle to this as well, which is just, I would argue, well, I was going to say the more human side of it, I suppose, or everything we've just spoken about there affects humans. But, elderly people who are not used to using apps on their phone if they want to park their car. We don't want to live in a cashless society there, do we? The homeless as well rely on people giving them a few coins. If they're lucky, maybe a £5 note. If we live in a cashless society, that won't happen. People in rural communities who might not have a good internet connection, etc. All of this stuff. So looking at the cashless society from that angle of it as well, I really do think it's important that we don't just go fully digital, isn't it?
Right, totally. I mean, when you look at what's happened over the past 10, 20, even 30 years, is banks and the big banks now wield so much power. We saw it actually, didn't we, when Liz Truss came up with an economic programme that she thought would stimulate growth in this country. And essentially, the markets turned around and said, we don't like the sound of that when it comes to buying up government gilts and government bonds and so on and so forth. And so the markets essentially got rid of a Prime Minister in the UK. But when you look at how badly the banks have behaved back in, around 2008, and everyone remembers what happened, of course, to Northern Rock and the run on the banks and the huge credit crisis we had then, because banks were essentially behaving recklessly and totally irresponsibly. It was us, the consumers, who had to pick up the pieces. So essentially going to a cashless society is only going to embolden the banks more to run the world when they're not democratically elected. As you said, it will leave vulnerable people who potentially live more in the fringes when it comes to digital engagement at the whim and mercy of banks. But it also potentially has the power to lead to something kind of dystopian and similar to the Chinese Communist Party's social credit system, where if you don't act in a certain way or behave in a certain way in line with some sort of policy, be it governmental or the policy of the board of the bank, you can essentially have access to money cut off.
Exactly.
That is wrong.